Good morning. My name is Derek Bishop, and I'm the co-founder of Culture Consultancy. And we specialize in design embedding organization cultures to support strategy execution and business transformation, whether that be around growth, new operating models, digital transformations, M&A activity, or around high performance. So yeah, one of the areas that we really focus on is the human side within business. And as many regions sort of are entering and easing of lockdown, constraints of lockdown, this phase that we're approaching now is going to be more challenging, we feel, than the previous phase of strict lockdown, where there was a solid statement of expectations and the constraints within which we all had to go about our daily lives, including our working lives. Yeah, this next phase we think requires a lot more interpretation and judgments about the guidelines. And as leaders, we have a duty of responsibility for not only doing all the right things to keep our people safe, but also to lead on and support our people through this next phase, including for something about the returning to the workplace or a hybrid of some remote working, some in the workplace. So the topic for today's webinar is therefore focusing on those human dynamics around how do we engage our people through this next phase, and returning to the levels of productivity and performance that we, and every organization will need from our people to really perform through this next challenging phase and beyond. So we're going to look a little bit about some of the key considerations on the returning to the workplace, what that re-engagement of our people, what it should look like and how we could go about it. And looking at the role of managers and the pivotal role that they'll play within that. And then look briefly at some of the technology that could support us with that as well. So we have a lot of content to get through today, and join me today to get through all this content is Piers Mummery, who's the UK Managing Partner of Tech CXO, and Nigel Watson, who's one of the team here at Culture Consultancy, and particularly Nigel's been supporting some of our clients with some of the transitions through this phase. So actually, I'll just, Piers, if you could just give us a quick introduction, that will be fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. Well, good morning, and thank you, Derek. So my name is Piers Mummery, and as Derek said, I'm the UK Managing Partner for an organisation called Tech CXO. This is an American firm, and the background of the company is providing on-demand executive services. So we have 110 partners, all sort of accomplished C-suite executives, from CEOs through CFOs, right the way through all the C-suites in a business. And we now, as an advisory group, work with growing companies. So our sort of market speciality is scale up and growth businesses. And we basically advise on strategies to grow the business. As I said, I'm the UK partner, and I work with a number of businesses here in the UK, providing advisory work to help these companies grow and particularly now get through the pandemic. So delighted to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Piers. Nigel, would you like to just give us a quick intro for everybody on the call today?
Yeah, of course. My name is Nigel Watson. So for those of you that I haven't met, I've been with Culture Consultancy about 5.5 years now. I live in rural North Wiltshire with my wife and 3 teenage children. And those of you that do know me will know that I'm kind of extremely passionate about people performance, whether that's individually through teams or organizations, in particular around cultures, dynamics, and the kind of the nuances that go with that. I'm fascinated by what motivates people and how to kind of get the most from those people in a way that they really enjoy.
Okay, thanks, chaps. So we'll get cracking on the content now, but if you do have any specific questions that you'd like me to put for us to discuss, then please do put them in the chat function, and we'll incorporate them in our discussions. So let's crack on then. So first of all, and maybe Piers, I can ask you to kick off with this one. What do you see as being the big challenges for businesses and leaders in this next phase of return to the workplace? Where they're returning in some form, or where they're adopting maybe a hybrid remote working, and some people in the workplace. And some people may have been furloughed and returning. So what do you see as some of the big challenges?
Yes, I mean, it's a very big topic. And I think first and foremost, what I'm advising people is that to be careful that you don't just make this a functional exercise. The move into lockdown was straightforward in the sense of it's not a complicated process. It's just more of a logistical exercise. But the return back is not just about being functional. This is a human exercise. And I think it's all about people. And fundamentally, businesses have been about people, for generations. So this is nothing new. But we've really got to focus on the fact that this is a human exercise. And particularly for the employees who've been through a multitude of experiences, we've got to remember and recognize as leaders that your employees will be at both ends of the experience spectrum. So some of them are going to be chomping at the bit and can't wait to come back to work because, get away from the kids, get away from the partner, and so on. But there'll equally be other people who are not engaged with that at all. So you have to be very mindful of that as a leader. So I think the challenge for leadership and management today is creating that very fine balance and understand the complications that surround this. So, there are many more variables to consider. This is going to take a lot longer. And there's a phrase going around at the moment about creating the part-time office. So traditionally, if you've got a worker who works in an office, but it's been identified that they can work remotely or from home, then give them that as an option and just say, look, you have an office, but you also have a home office as well, and you have the option and the choice. So that's going to take, that's not for everybody, of course. There are going to be an awful lot of questions from staff when they come back into an environment, and many of those questions you may not be able to answer. You'll have taken probably all of the practical steps and lots of things you will have done. But again, this is another layer of change, and things will be very different. And as we know, people tend to resist change at the best of times. So you've got to gradually work with people through that process. And I think also, which a point to consider is that, we've all been in lockdown for pretty much 3 months now. And in that time, there will be a new norm, a new habit that's formed within people. And now we're asking people to change again and come back into a sort of an adapted workplace. So again, we have to recognize that the challenges of new habits are formed in people. And whilst I'm sure everybody's been super productive working at home, there will be exceptions to that, of course. And I think we've got to recognize that, optimizing performance can't be the first agenda, first item on the agenda. We don't have any certainty. We've got some quite tough decisions to make going forward. But we've got to recognize people's personal agendas. And again, I think also from a human perspective, recognize what people have been through. You will find people who've been through experiences from grief to, income reduction to, all sorts of challenges. And I know quite a few people I've had conversations with who've had that sort of reevaluation of their life experience, which is that, work-life balance, commuting. So there are all these facets that as managers we need to understand. So I think the message I would put out to most business leaders today is just develop and sort of prime your management teams with compassionate leadership and compassionate management. And it's a new style that should perhaps flow through the business. Everything's got to change around the attitude to people. And I think, to the point around why this is such a topical conversation for us, is this is an opportunity to reset the culture. If there are aspects of your business that you're not comfortable with historically, this is a perfect time to recognize the opportunity for change. So I think, as I said, it's everything's about balance here. And, I think something else which is important to point out is there's still an extraordinary level of uncertainty in the future. So as managers, we have to try and create some certainty within people. That's going to be very hard because we don't know whether there'll be a second wave. We don't know whether we'll go back into lockdown. We don't know how fast or slow the economy will kickstart. So what I'm advising people is to have a sort of what I refer to as a now, near and far plan. So traditionally you'd have an annual business plan and you might sort of set that for the year with teams. Try and break that now down to 6 months, into 3 months, and in some cases even down to a month. So have that flexibility and try as best you can to create the certainty within people to say, look, we've got a plan for the next 3 months and then we'll revisit things. So it's important that that, what's changed, what you're doing, and then communicate that to people. And, as we know, to create good culture, it's about aligning people behind, the vision that you have as a business. And I think the other side of it is, we can all be compassionate and humanized, but you can't fix everything or fix everyone. And, you have to be tough at times. I was reading recently about British Airways, spending somewhere in the region of £180 million a week just to keep the business going. That sadly will just force a number of decisions because that's completely unsustainable. So, it's okay to be tough, and I think that's an important point to note. But fundamentally, be consistent, be very understanding, and be patient with people.
Okay, thanks, Piers. Nigel, do you have some additional sort of thoughts around this in terms of some of the challenges that we're going to face into?
Yeah, I think that there's some. I think Piers has captured some key areas there. I think that there's a couple that I wanted to just kind of pick up on. I think this idea about the reset in particular, I wanted to hone in on. People are kind of in that thought process of snapping back, and very easily that can go to kind of a functional process. How do we kind of make sure desks are far enough apart and things like that, and that's incredibly important. But that human aspect that Piers was alluding to is really important. But I think there's something in between that kind of says, well, what are we snapping back to? And the risk is that we try and snap back to something as similar to where we were before. And so the challenge I think we put onto that is perhaps, are we looking to snap back to something familiar or something that really works? And if we work on the basis that organizational learning and performance is greater than or equal to the speed of environmental change, then there has been enormous environmental change. That context, that backdrop has changed fundamentally, both in terms of how we're operating and who we're operating with, what the kind of the demand and flow of kind of product and service, but also, as Piers alluded to, with people, their context and backdrop has changed. So we'll explore that a bit further as we go through today. So those are the kind of the key areas I wanted to pick up on.
Yeah, so actually just building on that, Nigel, then, so in terms of the engagement of people in the journey and what we're trying to, the next phase and what's needed, it feels like it requires some very special thought around what is that engagement. How do we get the engagement and transition back in people into the workplace beyond the functional thing that both of you have talked about? And it's almost like it's sort of quite similar to like maybe an induction plan. If you were taking on a load of people, you'd have an induction plan. Yeah. But what are your thoughts on what that engagement plan, what it needs to consider?
What's interesting is increasingly now engagement plan and re-engagement plan is becoming part of the kind of the corporate vocabulary. So that's a relief. But what's in it is kind of the key, I think. If we think about the people and take kind of Piers's point that people are in fundamentally different places. I mean, literally and metaphorically, both in the office, working remotely, but also at different ends of the spectrum in terms of desperate to get back to work, desperate to get back to, in inverted commas, some degree of normality, versus people themselves that are in the high risk category or have family in the high risk category, and therefore actually can't yet envisage going back into a workplace and actually have a heightened sense of anxiety around that, either themselves or within the family. So it's how do you kind of move that audience, so those people, to a place where not only they can get back to kind of that prior responsiveness and agility, but to a heightened sense, because really organizations now are going to need people to be in a place where they can very swiftly adapt and respond to change. And it feels like that's very much about coming back to purpose, and it's about kind of restating, the context, the purpose. And so it's a very conscious effort to get to that kind of that kickstart. So it's almost that sense of, looking at the purpose. What's the team here to do? How are we going to interrelate with all of our multiple stakeholders? So customers, suppliers, shareholders, other teams, but also wider community, leadership, all of those different aspects and facets. But not only how do we interact with them, how do we bring value to those? So, I think that's the starting point of a conversation for people in terms of then being able to very much focus on the context of right things right in today's environment. And I think resisting that temptation to go back to what was familiar is really important for a couple of reasons, but in particular, that sense that this provides an opportunity to say, let's actually set our compass differently. Let's set it in response to what's really going to deliver real business opportunity and value. So, start from the kind of the outside in, the future, and work back, if you like.
Okay. Piers, what's your thoughts around the whole re-engagement exercise?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating point there that Nigel's raised about, this sort of snap back to where we were. And I think, this is a natural human instinct, which is in times of pressure and stress, we want to go to a place of security and safety. So we go back to what we used to know. But I think we really, as business communities, need to really understand and acknowledge that the significance of the breadth of change and the factors that affected people in so many different ways, and it really is not a one size fits all. So whilst on the one hand I absolutely agree a company has to have purpose, it's got to have a little bit of a backbone to understand where it's going and get people to fall into line, we really have to just come back and say that this is a gradual process. So this may take some months, and I think there's going to be a sort of finding of feet and feeling your way through this very gently. There will be tempers flaring, so pressure will be on people, stress levels will be high. So there's going to be, all sorts of things going on. And when we first went into lockdown, I used to talk to companies about the fact that what coronavirus has created is almost like it's a trauma on a very, very significant level. And if you think about the way in which we deal with that, it's, and by the way, I'm no counsel in this, but it's a little bit like the grieving process. There's 5 stages which we're going through, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And I think, that we've gone through probably the first of 2 of those. We're now in this process of sort of bargaining and trying to figure things out. And there could easily be, this sort of, for some people who, for example, have been at home for 3 months, can sit in the garden, walk the dogs, see the children, they've got an office, they don't have to commute. They're still being productive, they're getting through all of their work, but they're shaving off 4 hours a day of commuting and mucking around. They're saving money left, right and centre. They're having a pretty good time, so they will come back to work and it'll be a whole different regime for them. They'll be worse going back to work in some respects because they're now back into the commute, back into the normality. So there may be a sort of depression element of that with people. Equally, I think there'll be people at the other end of the spectrum who have been forced into working from home. And, I'm my son, as an example, he lives and he spends his time working on his bed on his laptop. That is not a sustainable work environment. Physically, it's a terrible place. But, he misses his friends, but, he just can't wait to come back to work. So he's really energized. So I think we've got to really understand the individual nuances of people. And I think you'll find some people will snap back to saying, can't wait to get back into it. But there has to be an appreciation of the new normality, which will be here for a short period of time. But I think then if you look at this, long term, and I'm talking maybe 2-3 years down the road, this will be a period in time which we will never forget. But we will come back to how we were doing business traditionally. And I think the point which I think Nigel has touched on this is this opportunity to reset things is really, really important. And the thing that I've been particularly inspired by is the humanization of business. So really, really understanding and talking to your people on a very personal level and a very human level to understand them is going to do nothing but just build great stability and great sort of foundations in the business from a cultural point of view. So I'm excited by that, but I think it's really a question of patience and understanding.
That's an interesting point, Piers, because one of the things we've talked about on a previous webinar is about how, engaging in conversation and about checking in with people and understanding what's really going on for them and the challenges. But, if you ask people, how are you doing, how are you coping, what are you experiencing, you may not always get the real truth of the response. Whereas actually as a leader, if you, first of all, offer up, these are the things that I'm challenging with, it's not been easy for me, this is what I've been grappling with, then you ask the question of, so how's it been, how are you finding it and what your challenges, the likelihood of you getting a genuine response from the other person significantly boosts, because you've made it okay to share that, that it's not all easy. And personally, this is what I've grappled with.
I couldn't agree with you more, Derek. I mean, I was on hosting a webinar the other week on leadership strategies going into this new world, and the prevailing view in terms from a leadership point of view is authenticity, being very key, being very honest, being very open, being concise. And exactly as you say, by sharing your experiences with your people about yourself and what you've been going through, it just makes you more human. you know, a lot of the things I found, which is interesting around webinars, you know, you're looking at people in a meeting and you're seeing them in their homes. That automatically makes them human. You know, and I've been on webinars where we've got children walking past and pets barking, and you know, there's something quite fun about that and something quite spooky about it too. But I think that human element, you know, and it's about not trying to cover that up, but just be very, very honest, authentic, and open with your people. It's going to make a huge difference in terms of engagement with individuals.
Yeah,
I think that's really important, that sense of actually welcoming kind of people's homes into the environment, because I think it's very easy to kind of, you know, sit and look at the kind of the textbook side of you know, how do we engage with our people and disclosure, and that it's an absolutely critical element. But as you say, Piers, doing that authentically is what's really, really key. And when we're you know, Zoom calling or team calling into somebody's home, we're gifted the opportunity to see something of their environment. I was on a call last night with somebody, and you know, just happened to look up above their head, and you know, there was a kind of hunting bow and arrow, and you know, it was just something that was important to them. You know, they were on a different continent, and that was kind of part of their world and culture. But it's about, I think, noticing those things and starting those conversations. I've been speaking with people recently who've been saying, you know, but the difficulty is you can't open up trust, you can't have trusting conversations remotely, and you can, but it's about learning to do that, and that really is a critical skill. So I think that's maybe one of the things we come back to and pick up in a bit more detail as we go through, Derek.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is it's about making it okay to have the right sorts of conversations and open up. And so I had an update from one of our clients this morning where, you know, the director, the executive of the business, they've got 2,000 people globally, and every fortnight they've been having all staff dialing calls. On yesterday's, they did something different, which was that executive actually gave all the updates, but then talked about the challenges that they have been facing themselves with this environment, and actually then encouraged everybody to go and speak to their manager that day about the reality for them, and not just the, oh yeah, oh, this has been difficult, but the reality of it. And just doing that from the very top made it, has actually, the feedback we've heard is that it's made quite an impact, and people are, and all of a sudden started having those conversations that perhaps before they weren't having. And it's about making it right and making it okay for people to do that, and encouraging it, and have those different types of conversations.
You know, one of
that
the
becoming part of the new norm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of the clients within Tech CXO are based in the US, and obviously a lot of those organizations are now sort of easing of lockdown, returning to work, and that's been around for a while. One of the most fascinating things is the significant number of daily huddles that are now going on with people. And again, it depends on the size of the company, but in departments and teams, and sometimes in whole companies, getting the entire team together is a really important part of this process. And it's also challenging, I think, for some of the larger organizations, because we're seeing you know, desk sharing or desk hoteling. So the idea of the part-time office, you know, so you can all come to work on a Monday and Tuesday, and your desk is yours on a Monday and Tuesday, and somebody else's on a Thursday and Friday. That makes it quite hard, but the importance of bringing people together and just doing that very, very regularly. You know, this is not just one meeting, hi, how you doing? Great to see you. Let's get back to work. It's got to be a long process. And actually, as managers, you know, managers will have to work a lot harder than they have before to really get under the skin of people. And it's going to take that authenticity to do that. Because, you know, I think humans, you know, we can see through these things, and, you know, we all sort of know when that sort of false bonhomie is there. But if you really want to engage with people properly, you know, you need authenticity, but you've got to be consistent with that and just do it very regularly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. Just before we move on to the next question, if people do have any questions that you'd like us to incorporate in our discussion, then please do put them in the chat function, and I'll make sure we pick them up. So, I mean, we've obviously spoken so far significantly about the human side of it. And Piers, I just want to anchor back to something you mentioned earlier on about there's the other side of it, which is, you know, organizations are under extreme pressures, you know, significant falls in revenues, operating costs potentially have increased. They have experienced potentially some a drop in productivity and performance, you know, and everybody, we've been through the crisis management mode, but now we need to look to the future and that, you know, the sustainability of our businesses. So what are your thoughts on balancing like the business stroke commercial risks and the human and people risks that we've just been talking about, and some of the decisions we're going to have to make?
I think fundamentally everything that we do in the business today has got to be sustainable. So we can find these sort of short-term measures to prop things up, put a sticky plaster over things and keep things going. But I think again it comes back to trying to share as much as you're able to share with people, to explain the context. So in the case of, say, I mentioned about British Airways, so the parent company writing a check out for 180 million a week. If the staff understand what that really means, that is just not, there's not some bottomless pit of cash that can keep coming. We now need to come back in and and rebuild the business. And I think there's sort of three things to rebuild a business would be, first and foremost, reassurance. And I think that's a really big part of the revival process. So I've talked a lot in the past about survive, revive, and thrive. We're a long way from the thrive mode. We're in revive mode at the moment. If you can get through the survival piece, which is you've shored up your finances and you've shored up your people and you've kind of rallied around, where you're going, then the most important thing now is to be, as leaders, reassuring to people, we're going to be okay. We're going to come through this, because a lot of people can't cope with this. I don't mind being open about it. I've had wobble moments myself, where you just have utter moments of despair and doom and gloom. Thankfully, not too many of those, but it's hard. So management should, first of all, reassure. I think the second is then inspiration. So you've got to be able to give them a new vision as to what you want that business, your business, to achieve. And that's then creating motivation. And motivation is just checking in with people regularly, reviewing performance in a positive way. It's more about incentivizing the thought process rather than using a stick to beat people along the way. And ultimately, I think the best place a company could try and hope to be is where you've got staff who want to come back to work as opposed to have to come back to work. And if you can create that, you've really nailed it.
Nigel, any further thoughts on that at all?
No, other than I think just to add that sense of I think if you can get that sense of people wanting to come back to work, but it's in whatever context, and retaining that openness about where they're working from, whether that is in an office or home, because actually fundamentally industry is moving to a point where that shouldn't matter. And, it's getting to a point where how do we embrace, that, what can we do in terms of, human behaviors, leadership, management styles, and also kind of, what tools do we have to support? So I know we've got a question that's come in from somebody prior to this session, so I can talk about a little bit more of that in response to it.
Yeah, okay. And so actually, Nigel, let's move on to that question that somebody did email in advance, which was, in some companies where colleagues work in really close-knit and highly supportive teams, how do you maintain this feeling of pride, loyalty, and commitment, and hence the high levels of productivity, when the team will now be working remotely from different locations? So clearly there's, I know in this business, they come together for very specific things and they work really well, but they're physically working in the same space, whether that be a workplace or out doing events. So how do you create that same feel, Nigel?
Yeah, and I think that's a massive challenge. So if you take that particular example, there's the groups of people that kind of coming together on almost project by project type basis, but working very closely within each other's kind of spaces. They're kind of physically close to each other, and we're saying that really the new norm is going to be very different from that. So for me, a lot of that stems then around how do you create a really safe environment where there are high levels of trust, because that's what you intrinsically have when you've got those people working closely together in those kind of high energy type environments. When you pick out the words pride, loyalty, commitment, underpinning that is really high levels of trust. So it's how do we get to that, in a kind of more of a virtual space. And I think if we can kind of hold that question, that's really important. And again, it comes back to, I think, this sense of reconnecting people back to purpose, and connecting people back to a purpose in today's context, not where it was pre-lockdown, and involving people and engaging people around that. So checking in and saying, okay, so what is it that we believe we do? Where are we bringing that value? How are we going to do it? How do we want to do it? And who are we going to do it with? So that actually, that's not just a two-way conversation, that's a multiple-way conversation. It's beyond just the manager or the leader feeling that pressure to say, how do I do that? And that right now is there's anxiety within management and leadership around how do I pull these people together? and actually involving them in the process is really key and critical to that. This sense, as you know, as we were talking about earlier, and Piers was talking about, factoring in, you know, where those people are at a human level, and building that in, and you know, kind of embracing that from their homes, as it were, and stepping back towards a kind of an open sharing culture, where we're connecting with people at a much deeper personal level. Because the opportunity for setting off tripwires now is greater than ever. If you're on, you know, regular Zoom call with somebody, you're not having that face to face, and you set off a tripwire, you say something that actually they take personally or in the wrong context, possibly just because there's stuff going on in their world at the moment. Yeah, anxieties are raised, then it's harder to repair that. You know, you can't just birth alongside them at the coffee machine anymore. And so this sense of actually, you know, what are we leading? What are we managing? Hearts and minds. So how do we lead that effectively? We have to understand those hearts and minds. And so actually taking the time to do that, I think, is really important. And I think a number of teams where they're used to working really well together run the risk of potentially skipping over that and saying, well, we're already a tight formed team. And they were, but in a different context. So for me, it's all about context. And that's what I heard coming through with Piers as well, is this sense of, let's look at the context and let's just remap our future. Because we were tight before means we can probably do it much quicker than other teams, but it's still a really important step to do. And if you kind of step back to almost a situational leadership type model, where that early phase is you go high directive, so that actually there's real clarity around, you know, what are the parameters, what are the timescales, priorities, accountabilities, how we do things, you know, back to those basics, so that people are really clear about them. Then they can step forward really quickly from that, but in a place of kind of safety and a place of trust. And that psychological safety in this new post-COVID world, although we're not quite post-COVID yet, but we have to believe that we're going to be stepping to that, is really, really important. And then, along with the kind of the human processes that go with that, we're now looking at you know, what are the kind of the enabling tools and technologies that go alongside and support that. And you know, there's a number of different kind of nudge push type software platforms and things like that. We're also looking and actually actively with a number of clients now, as you know, with looking at, you know, learning type solutions, with look at specifically employee engagement, how they socially interact with each other, how you build kind of knowledge and performance management, and start to glue that together. So in a world that isn't quite as visible at any one time, it's using technology as well to underpin that on top of those human processes. So those are kind of, it's a quick answer to that, but I wanted to just pick up in particularly those words: pride, loyalty, commitment, because that's what I would be gunning to keep. And for me, that's around that safety, that trust, and the enabling processes and technologies that go with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying there, Nigel, about psychological safety, because research that have been done by Google over a couple of years, looking at their internal teams and which teams perform the best. Actually, psychological safety was one of those key requirements. And that's nothing to do with this current work environment. That's what they discovered. There was a fundamental requirement in their team. So, that it's almost like that's a heightened requirement moving forward because of the new work environment. But Piers, what are your other thoughts on this?
I just wanted to pick up on a word that Nigel raised, which I think is probably for me the core of this, is around trust. Because the best, a team is only as good as its weakest link. It's not being negative about it, but you've got to look at the whole construct of the team. And I'm a great believer that sort of trying to create sustainable teamwork, which is based on a sort of natural chemistry. Some people just click, some people just get on with it and they just work. And it's really understanding the sort of dynamic of your team in terms of that psychological safety you refer to, is that's just based around, it's very natural. It's very hard to force that in teams. So when you've got a real high functioning, high performance team who just click and work together well, then the threat to that is probably where the weakest links might be. And I think as a team leader or as a manager is to recognize probably two things in your teams, which is who are the stronger ones, where you've got that natural sort of teamwork coming through, and use that to empower them with some degree of responsibility. So maybe buddying up, and recognize particularly where the weaker links might be in the team. And this is not necessarily just weak people. This is just people who are not naturally formed in that team, and spend more time to energize them. Because they can be motivated to become part of a stronger team, the whole team will go up. All boats rise in a tide. So just what I would say to managers looking at team dynamics is try and find your weaker links and empower and get them supported, and empower your stronger links. Because fundamentally it's all down to trust, and more so if you're working with people remotely and you can't see them physically, you've got to be able to trust people to do their job. And I think that's a very key thing in leadership and management, is empowerment and trust of people to do what they do, and accepting what they do. So it's got to be natural, would be my view.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Now we've had a couple of questions come through that was sparked off by something you were talking about earlier on, Piers, about, how do we best acknowledge and manage people that are going through the change curve at multiple levels? Everybody's going through it, probably through the change curve at different paces, and actually somebody's made a point about not everybody will necessarily be moving forward all the time. Some actually might be tracked back through the change curve because of a change of personal circumstances. So how do we best acknowledge and manage, sort of lead and manage people through that complexity of everybody going at a different pace, some going backwards, some going forwards, some going forwards and then slipping back? How do we best do that?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, there are a few things you can do here, but I think first and foremost, you've got to recognise the individual needs of people and teams. So you're right. You're going to have a group of individuals coming back into a workplace or back into work, and they will be all at differing stages. As I mentioned right at the beginning, that sort of engagement spectrum, there are different levels. So the first thing for managers and leaders to recognise that. Recognition of that is really important. So there should be some form of, briefing session, some sort of, personal one-to-one engagement to try and really understand how that person is and where they're at in their emotional curve. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to be flexible, because whatever you're doing as a business, you've got to have flexibility and adapt. Of course, that's not always easy to do because you can't please everyone all the time. But so long as you can demonstrate flexibility to cater to individual needs, and where people are struggling, try and rally around to support those individuals. And I think the third to try and get through this is be consistent. Which is if you've reset your vision and if you've reset your purpose as to what you're trying to achieve, don't deviate from that. Keep the core purpose and the big picture absolutely on goal. In the same way, I know somebody mentioned about the 6th stage of grief, which is meaning. That fundamentally for me is about the end goal, and the end goal is you'll get through this. You don't get over grief, you just manage to cope and live with it. So it's having a sense of purpose at the end of it and being consistently working towards that. So to me, it's about recognition, flexibility, and consistency will be the way I'd approach that as a leader.
Nigel, do you have some thoughts to build on that?
I think it's just that sense that there are a number of organisations that perhaps pre-COVID could be described as macho type organisations, where perhaps we're kind of measuring attendance rather than performance. We're measuring kind of volume of contribution rather than quality of contribution. And I think it's about being able to switch that back. So Piers' element of get close to people, I think is absolutely critical. But I think starting to signal a resetting of that culture to something that is far more inclusive. So way beyond kind of colour and things like that, but it is about, psychological states and things like that, because that's how we get the best out of people. And this represents, post-COVID, a massive opportunity to start to look at a really effective way of working, locally within a workplace, scaled right across an organisation. So I think signalling that psychological safety and the importance of that, the recognition and the support and enabling support for things. So it's not somebody's broken, it's just they need a bit more support for them to be able to perform at their optimum, means that we all win. And actually it's a much nicer place to be a part of. So, sickness rates will drop and that kind of stuff. But it's about really being brave enough to signal some of those changes, and it's about doing that in a quite a gentle, authentic way that kind of just paints the picture for people that says, actually we're going to be in different places around this, and that's okay. And it's about conversation at that level of complexity, really, that's just honest and true, and people can respond to that, and that immediately starts something different. But if you don't kick that in early, then it's going to be really hard to build that. So it's an early conversation, and it's a building, and it's a continual, consistent conversation.
Can I just build on that, Nigel? I think something else is worth talking about is, coming into this 3-month blip that we've been in so far, and will still continue. is the companies coming into this, if you have a very bad underlying business, you're going to really struggle. And if you've got a poor business model, if you're just not achieving, you've got, all sorts of staffing issues, the chances of you getting through this is pretty slim. Good underlying businesses will get through this. If you've got a good, solid company, which has got sustainable growth, sustainable revenues, great people, award-winning, if you've got a good business, you'll get through it. What will happen in a crisis is your weaknesses will be amplified. And it's very important as a leader to recognize that, this is the chance where, you're being exposed. The tide's gone out and we're seeing all the foundations of the issues you may have in a business. So now is the time to get in and fix that in a sustainable way. And that sustainability is all about having, a very strong and a very good purpose and vision for the business. And then just, exactly as we know, aligning your people behind that. And being tough, because, there are people who won't. And if people don't want to align behind it, we'll get out the boat, go somewhere else. Because, if you're on a good, clear purpose with a good, positive mission, you'll bring good people. So I think the sustainability of the business is really, it's your underlying company. You've got to consider how good you actually are.
Let's take that one step further then, Piers, and go really brave. So there are organisations there, you're absolutely right, those that kind of were not so good or broken before, have no chance. Some of the kind of the chinks in the armour are probably around some of those kind of people that are kind of sitting in that old style management leadership that potentially could be the block to the new way of operating here. Those are the people that will kill your business.
Oh, completely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Nigel. Let's be, not controversial, but let's say be brave about this. What's happened and what I've seen in businesses is a huge influx of middle management into companies, which is all about catering and coping with the exception. So we always have to have a new person here to sign something off, or a new layer here. And the NHS is a very good example where you've built in all these tiers of lower management. And I'll give you an example is if you look at British Gas, they announced 5,000 redundancies. The vast majority, I think over 70%, are coming out of management, which is quite interesting because there's a sector that actually, if you remove these blocks and this middle management tier of, Jobsworths, for want of a better expression, I'm sorry if anyone's a Jobsworth, but it is what it is. That will unleash.
This isn't the call for you.
Yeah, this is probably the opportunity to develop an agile mentality as a business. That traditional hierarchical, autocratic, structured, waterfall management, it's gone. Forget it. You've got to be agile. And what's amazing, and I'm so impressed by this, if you look at what's happened in digital transformation, people have taken 2-year projects and condensed it into 2 months and made it work. What? Everyone can be agile if you just take away the bureaucratic rubbish and all the bullshit that goes with it. Really get down to the core. If you've got a good business with good people, you'll thrive. Just strip away, the rubbish.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that
agility starts with the individual and the teams. It's in the mindset. If you've got that, you can do it.
Yeah, the key thing is that actually to enable that, some of the politics needs to be cleared out of the way. And I've spoken to a number of organisations where the crisis and managing through that, particularly early days, actually is amazing how the politics just got pushed to one side.
Yes.
And actually it's like, and the key thing for that was we have a clear set of common goals. It's about doing the right thing for our customers, keeping our people safe, and then it's about safeguarding the business. 3 primary goals that it just, whereas before they'd had to negotiate and work across different businesses to get things done, that clarity of these are the 3 most important things to us, and that's what we're doing, just cleared some of the politics. But actually, just thinking about that, and in terms of actually from a leadership and management point of view, that therefore there is so much more. There's increased demand and increased complexity and challenges for managers and leaders throughout all levels of the organisation. So, what do you see as being those sort of key capabilities which managers are going to need to have in order to really successfully lead their teams through? And to come out the other side in a much stronger and growth position.
So, Derek, I'll jump on this because I'm very passionate about this particular area because I work with growth companies. Okay, and the one thing that growth companies have all got as a common denominator is bravery. And for leaders, managers, workers, it goes right the way through the organisation. Don't tell your boss I told you this, but seek forgiveness, not permission. Just go and do what needs to be done and execute. Stop sitting there navel gazing and wondering and planning around. Go and do it. That's the difference between companies that grow and companies that do. So having the ability to take out these layers of bureaucracy and having the confidence and the courage of your own convictions to be brave, that's what I would be advocating to my people is, go and be brave. Go and lean into this thing, because this is the golden opportunity. And if you look at the number of multi-billion pound organizations, dollar organizations that were created out of the last recession, it's extraordinary. Companies like WhatsApp, Uber, these were formed immediately following the last recession. So this downturn is the greatest opportunity. If you can jump over all of the stuff that's gone on, yes, it's terrible, it's awful and so on, but we can't sit there wallowing forever. Okay, let's put that stuff, recognize it, accept it, and now find a way we can be brave and move on, because it's, now is the time to execute, without doubt.
So, Nigel, your thoughts on the manager capabilities? They're going to be like right up there at the top that we need to make sure they're equipped with.
Yes, I'm with Piers on the courage. I think that's really, really important. I think the other one we keep coming back to is this sense of being oriented around the purpose, defining that, and being really clear, and having the courage to do that. And one of the reasons for keep coming back to that is it begs the question of what's the real value that we're delivering, and it's about going out and asking the people that are the recipients of that value, not what we think in our ivory towers or in our meeting rooms, be it physical or virtual. It's about what is that real value that delivers something, and then when we look at whatever team it is, how do we get beyond just the sum of the parts? How do we get to actually just delivering way beyond that is about how we really come together? What's the kind of culture and the nuances, the dynamics that go with that allow us to really deliver against those values? Because the world is only going to get more complex and tougher. It's only going to be full of more surprises. They're going to be coming faster, and it's about being in a place where people are ready for that. And so that starts with the managers and the leaders being in that mindset to say, things are going to change on a pretty regular basis. So it's about being agile in my mindset and confident in my mindset. And there's going to be things I haven't done before. There's going to be ways of interacting with people I've not done before, but I need to learn and get good at that. And I can, and I will. And, I think it's that kind of mindset. It's that sense, as we talked about earlier, of people being much more aware and in tune with their people, being much more empathetic and flexible, being able to build in those different things that could potentially be barriers for people to really engage at different level. If we can overcome those, and again, it's almost that kind of diversity and inclusion piece, but with everybody. So it's not actually centered around color or anything like that. It's centered around who are you? What do you need to be really truly empowered, and having the courage to empower people. So I think those are, two or three others that I'd kind of add into them.
I was discussing the other day.
All of those take that courage.
The other day, I was discussing with a colleague about COVID has created a new city without a map. And, we've got to build a sat-nav system to get around this, which I think is quite an interesting analogy, because, we don't know what we're dealing with here, and we don't know what the future holds, and, how we're going to pay back all these trillions and gazillions of pounds that have been loaned and given away is anyone's guess, frankly. What we can do is do what we can do with in front of us. And I often say that this is a real test of common sense, which is, there are so many now rules and regulations about going into the workplace. Use your common sense, use it as a guide, not a rule book, and let's pave our own way and figure things out as we go along. So, there are people who will lean into this as an opportunity. And I think there are, superb opportunities. So I think complexity in the workplace is more about opportunity in the workplace, because we're now faced with lots more decisions. So pick a few, pick three that you love and just go and do it. Follow that instinct, follow that sort of, the courage of your own conviction.
Well, it is that new opportunity, Piers. You're absolutely right. But if you stick with accepting the kind of behaviors within management and leadership that stand in the way of it, then you're dead. And never quicker than post-COVID. Watch this space. So it's that sense of actually, as long as people are snapping together in a different way that it represents the context, this is a massive opportunity for people.
And I guess just thinking about what you both said there is that actually this doesn't have to be like a top-down thing. So a leader of a team, it can be done at team level, departmental level, divisional level. So it's almost like, don't wait for there to be a new agenda set from the top of the organization. If you're a leader, a manager,
don't wait for permission, just do it.
Just get on with it. Exactly. Just really, what do you need to deliver as a team? and how do you go about making that happen? Don't wait for others, create that change yourself. And I think that's something just for people to be really aware of. It doesn't need that top down. It needs that, just create the energy. And I guess,
and if the company is blocking that value, then there's something wrong. Either you've got to remove that block, or you've got to move. It's one of those two things.
Yeah.
There's that difference between sort of, that macro managers, micromanagers. You've seen and heard about people, putting sort of, people working at home, they're checking in every hour to make sure they know what they're doing. So you've got those very controlling, tight management regimes, which fail. We know that because it's just not a way to manage people. Or the macro manager that empowers people. And surprise, surprise, if you empower people to go off and do their own things and check in with them from time to time, your life becomes easier because you don't have to spend all your time looking after people and nursemaiding them. So I'm a great advocate of empowering people to go and do their thing, and just do it to the very best and just check in and make sure they're broadly on course.
Now, we've touched on quite a lot of like the manager capability. We've also talked about the employee experience. And I think what's clear to me is that we need to completely redesign the end-to-end employee experience. So I was talking to a client the other day whereby he's got 50 people waiting to be inducted into the business. And the current mindset is, well, how quickly can we get the workplace ready to get those people in to train them up? And actually, no, it's about redesigning what's the employee experience. How do we recruit? How do we induct? How do we onboard in a remote working or a hybrid sort of model? So it's a prime opportunity now to rethink what is the employee experience throughout the end-to-end employee life cycle with us, from talent and attraction all the way through to leaving and alumni, that will fit for the organization, for culturally, and also for the new operating model. But Nigel, you mentioned, you touched on briefly a few minutes ago about technology, and we've been talking a lot about the human dynamics of all of this. From a technology point of view, what are some of the things that you're seeing that is working really well, where technology is helping this to happen?
Yeah, so I think context-wise, I think if you take Piers's point about these kind of layers of middle management, adding people in for the next new function, I think there isn't a formula to do that quick enough. It won't happen, and it's expensive, and it's too time-consuming to do it going forward. So then if we're looking at actually recreating that whole experience, as you said, Derek, and looking at redefining kind of roles, processes, and things like that, but where possible, underpinning that and enabling that with technology. So there's kind of different levels, whether that's, we're engaging people kind of socially around kind of company missions and things like that. There's value in that, but I think it's moving beyond that into technology solutions that kind of embrace that whole employee experience and look at actually how do we rapidly train up people? How do we give people a single point of access to being able to learn really quickly, both kind of on the job type experience and kind of technical skills to be able to kind of enable greater performance, and look at how do we then kind of glue the disparate parts of our organization together. And so, we've been looking at technology solutions and platforms that do exactly that, but also link into this whole idea of performance management, and even down to, we recruit people in that kind of dead time when you've kind of interviewed, you've offered somebody the job before they actually start, and their creativity, their enthusiasm is kind of waning at that point. So how do you you can put technology solutions in place that kind of take care of that and start to induct them before they even arrive, start to engage them in how we do things around here, before they even kind of land on the door and or land through the door. So there's technology solutions now that are really cheap, really affordable, that enable people to have different types of conversation. And I think that's the key, is it's looking at not just doing things for the sake of it, but it's what will greatest enable those two-way conversations. How do we really get everybody talking? Because that's what we need. This, as you said earlier, this top-down approach is dead. There's room for a bit of it, but not much. The organizations won't survive with that. So how do we really embrace and embed and distribute that culture, and then fire up that culture across the whole organization? And we're seeing technology as one of the enablers to be able to do that.
I think on the technology side, I mean, I've been a great a great advocate of technology. I love tech, but I think tech for tech's sake, sometimes you've got to be careful to make sure that the business process or the employee process drives the technology, not the technology driving the process. So, from a leader or a manager, if you're onboarding or bringing employees into the workplace, start with the end in mind. That will be challenging because we don't have, clarity right now as to what the next 6 months or 9 months or 12 months might look like, but go beyond that. And I think whatever you're doing from a technology point of view in terms of designing any form of workflow support mechanism should start with that endpoint in mind and work backwards and milestone it, but have flexibility so you can adapt to that roadmap as you go along. But above all, don't let tech drive the process, let the process drive the tech.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Piers. I'm conscious of time. There's a question that I just really wanted to, Piers, if I can just fire this one to you and just give you sort of a quick thought here on how do we prepare ourselves in advance, if it's possible, for the second wave, as leaders or for our teams, if we're going to go through a second wave of lockdown, what thoughts have you got on how we could prepare for that?
Well, they always say, it's the old adage about, plan for the worst and, then it can only get better from there on. So I think don't be too negative about it, but I think be realistic that it's a very high probability that we could end up with a second wave of this. So I would say first and foremost, learn from what's gone through this experience and figure out what you've done well, what you haven't done well, what you can improve on. And then formulate a plan for the second wave, because it'll be pretty much the same as what we've had before. So nothing will really change that dramatically, I suspect. So I would say learn from what we've done here, what's worked, what hasn't, and then put in a fairly bulletproof plan that if we do go into a second wave with a lockdown and other issues, implement that. With one caveat, which is recognize that we probably will unlikely to have the financial support for a second wave and a second lockdown that we've had in this first time, because there isn't this bottomless pit of cash. So you'll need to start thinking about shoring up cash as a preservation in case of that. Bit of rainy day money, but I wouldn't say we're definitely going to have this. Just be alert, be flexible, be on top of it, and just learn from what we've experienced here.
Okay, thanks, guys. So my final question to you both is, because we're coming to the end of the hour now, is so based on everything we've discussed in the last 60 minutes, what are your sort of top two sort of points that you would like people to take away and action? And Nigel, perhaps if I can come to you first of all.
Yeah, I think this aspect of having the courage to have a clear line of sight around who it is that we want to be. So this idea around, purpose, centered around value, centered around, and everything organized behind that would be, I think, the number one for me. Number two would be around making sure that actually this is a team issue. It's a wider issue, and that people are really involved and engaged in that. So, taking on what Piers was saying just now is that sense that that's not 2 or 3 people taking themselves off in isolation and working out, what does good look like if this happens again. It's actually looking at, what's our best case, worst case, and actually sharing that with people or involving them in it. So as and when it happens, which is likely, it's not a surprise. People know what to do. It's part of muscle memory. They're ready to respond. So really involving and engaging people. So you've got that continual two-way conversation, and that's the new norm.
Okay. Thanks, Nigel. Piers?
Yeah, I think my two sort of concluding views on things would be to look at right now. It's about empathy, understanding, patience, all the human things about looking at people. So be a different type of leader stroke manager today, which is to be compassionate and really understand your people, because what you put in now will pave the way for the future. That's the first point. Yeah. The second is switch tack completely and lean into this. Be a perpetual optimist, because perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. There is positive in the future. We will get through this. This is a blip. We've come through many, many situations like this over thousands of years. So this is no different. This is the first time most people in our lifetime have experienced it. But just be positive, be optimistic, and show consistent enthusiasm and positivity for the future, because it's going to be fine. And I'm looking forward to the future. There's some great opportunities ahead of us, and everyone should be looking at the same thing.
Okay. Thanks to both of you, Piers and Nigel, for sort of sharing your thoughts and observations and guidance for for organizations and leaders and managers alike. And also thanks for everybody who's joined the call this morning. We will be sharing details of the recording with people, if anybody, because I know we had some people join a bit later on, so you can play catch up. If you wish to continue the conversation, then our contact details are shown here on the screen. So I'm sure any one of the three of us would be happy for you to reach out to us and talk anything about, you know, the people challenges, the human side of the challenges we're facing and the cultural dynamics. So feel free to reach out to us. And we will be posting details of our next in our webinar series over the coming couple of weeks. So we'll be picking up some more in July. So if you do have any particular topics that you would like us to be picking up as part of this series, then under the culture conversation, then please do get in touch. But thanks very much for your time. I hope you found it useful, and thanks again to Piers and Nigel for joining me this morning.
Thanks a lot, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.